When it comes to the future of the global LGBTQ rights movement, or just the future of queer people around the world, it's really disheartening to see that what we've noticed happen throughout much of the world, particularly in the global south, which is the continuous scapegoating of queer people for, in order to mask political and economic scandals, in order to divert attention, all of these things also starting to happen in places where we thought that mission was accomplished and people could be finally safe. And this sort of reminds us that not only is history non-linear but cyclical, but that you can never really put your suitcase down, no matter where you are. You have to sleep with one eye open. And that eye can no longer afford to just be on your own small community in a particular space or in your own country. There needs to be a much wider field of vision for that eye to encompass all queer people all around the world, because much like many of the other problems that we face that ignore borders today, including migration, including pandemics, including climate change, human rights abuses also seem to operate by osmosis, and many of the abusers around the world take cues from one another and actually coordinate with one another. And it's often these marginalized identities that are the first to feel to feel the brunt of these sharp radical moves towards conservatism or extremism or the right. And so queer people have unfortunately been like the canary in the mine. When you start seeing heightened repression on the most marginalized and most vulnerable of your populations, you need to be very aware that this is likely to continue unabated and to actually magnify and escalate moving forward. However, this is not our first time at this rodeo. There has been plenty of instances in the past where there have been radical changes, and this is no exception. We're looking at a place where, or a world right now, that a lot of what a lot of people thought was non-negotiable is becoming negotiable, particularly when it comes to who sets the agenda and what exactly is the trajectory of queer liberation throughout the world. So for the longest time, people have tried to emulate the trajectory of queer liberation in countries in the global north and use that as a sort of a blueprint, or at least some sort of guiding methodology of how to do or what maybe not to do in their own context. But once the balance of power in the world is shifting, and if we are headed towards a more multipolar world, or a world that single narratives of liberation or strategies of liberation are changing, that puts a lot of people into a panic, and it shouldn't. It's actually an opportunity to reimagine what this looks like and to really right the wrongs of the past. And not necessarily wrongs that were committed deliberately, but wrongs that were committed with the best of intentions because we simply didn't know. One of the things that I'm really optimistic about is in many parts of the world, including in places where it's extremely difficult to be queer and to be visible, technological advancements, sort of the ability of communities to communicate with one another now across the world more easily has led to the increased mobilization and organization of queer people that are trying to figure out exactly what does liberation look like for them in their own context, without excising themselves from a much wider global queer rights movement for equality and for equity. I believe that this is a really important development because it has prompted a lot of people that had been silent in the past or had felt ostracized by this sort of global existing system or global existing set of institutions that focus on LGBTQ equality due to no fault of their own, are starting to stand up and take a lot more agency and are starting to diagnose and be curious about their own systems and how they navigate within their own systems. And in many parts of the world, the backlash has increased, which is very disheartening and scary. But from a strategy point of view, and if you are, like me, a student of sort of the history of queer movements, you will notice that this is also paradoxically a marker of progress, because your interventions and the way you are maneuvering as a community and as activists is starting to ruffle some feathers. And that, unfortunately, is part of the necessary growing pains of many of our liberation movements, not just queer, but all other liberation movements. Very few movements are given, very few victories are handed to you on a silver platter. The United States, despite its extremely complicated relationship with the Middle East, and often antagonistic relationship with the Middle East, still has given us lessons in how civil rights movements are done, and done effectively, whether it's the movement for racial equality or Stonewall. These are parts of American history that are extremely important for anybody working in the social justice field in order to study and emulate. And none of them came without sacrifice. None of them came without people putting everything on the line, including, unfortunately, their lives in many cases. And there's no reason to believe that any of our liberation movements across the world won't, unfortunately, require similar levels of sacrifice. Hopefully they don't, but none of it will be easy. And we are up against extremely well-coordinated, well-financed, well-armed systems of oppression. It's going to take a long time to dismantle them. It's going to take a lot of creativity and maneuverability. What I am extremely hopeful for is that every single time I speak to a young queer activists from anywhere in the world, they seem to be more galvanized, more intent, more curious than ever to solving this extremely complex and chronic public problem of homophobia and transphobia. And they're coming up with increasingly creative ways that fit their own context and don't necessarily try to replicate what happened in other places in the world and sort of hope it works. That, to me, is exactly the seeds of what will later on germinate to be true, sustainable equity and equality for people where they are,